Well, hello everyone. This is Wes Henson, pastor of the Ridge Church, and the Ridge Church campus is located at 7350 Old Highway 13 in Carbondale, Illinois. And I want to thank you for joining me today as we give a quick on-the-go summary of this week's small group Bible study for the week of January the 23rd, 2022 at the Ridge Church. This week we begin a brand new topic of study, and it's titled How to Avoid Life's Pitfalls. And our first session is titled The Pitfall of Betrayal, and we'll be looking in Genesis chapter 37. So let me encourage you to get a Bible, open it up to Genesis chapter 37 as we look there for our scripture text today. If you click on the links, you're going to find a study guide, a summary of this week's lesson, along with several handouts. And then join us on campus Sunday morning at 9 a.m. or you can join us online Tuesday night at 6:30 on Facebook or our website as we go into detail. All right, let's take a look at this week's lesson. The point of our study this week is that God is at work even when it's not obvious. And that probably rings true to several folks today, because God at work is not always obvious in our life, but God is working in our life through our circumstances, and we sometimes just are unable to detect it. Let me give you a little background of our study today. We're in the book of Genesis, and the book of Genesis provides the account of God's people from the time of his promise to Abraham until the deaths of Jacob and Joseph. Jacob being Abraham's grandson and Joseph being his great-grandson. In Genesis, God showed how he would how he worked in the lives of Abraham and his extended family to guide them in keeping his plan for his people. God had a plan for the people, and God used people to fulfill God's plan, and we see God's hand guiding them through each of the turns as that plan was brought about. So as we focus on the family of Jacob this week, let us be reminded that all families are somewhat dysfunctional. Certainly Jacob's family was. And this dysfunction is often passed on from generation to generation. And Jacob was no exception. He was blind to his fault of favoritism to Joseph, just as he was blind to his mom's fault of favoritism to him over Esau. And Jacob had made huge mistakes that would flow down to his children and deeply affect the whole family. So in the final chapters of Genesis, they focus on Joseph, and who is one of Jacob's 12 sons, and his experience of betrayal. All right, let's look at our text. Genesis chapter 37, let's look at verses 1 through 5, and we get a little introduction to Joseph. At 17 years of age, Joseph tended sheep with his brothers. As we read on, we see, and he brought a bad report about them to their father. Now Israel loved Joseph more than his other sons. Now that's Jacob. Israel and Jacob, same person. Now Israel, Jacob, loved Joseph more than his other sons because Joseph was born to him in his old age, and he made a long-sleeved robe for him. And when his brothers saw that their father loved him more than all of his brothers, they hated him and could not bring themselves to speak peaceably to him. Verse 5, Then Joseph had a dream, and when he told it to his brothers, they hated him even more. So the truth here in verses 1 through 5 is that sometimes pitfalls come through no fault of our own. And we see here that by the time Joseph reached the age of 17, jealousy within the family had given birth to hatred, and it was nourished by resentment. And while Joseph's predicament was mostly his father's fault, although I got to say that Joseph brought a lot of it upon himself. He was a tattletale. He was a braggart. But his father had a lot to do with his situation as well. But it's also important here to notice that the sovereign will of God, the providence of God, that played out in this account, in this story. And so Joseph had a dream in which he got his first glimpse of what God was going to do. God's will, if you will, for his life, what was going to transpire. And God sent the dream, and Joseph shared what he saw. And he shared it with his brothers, and perhaps he would have been better to just keep it to himself. But Joseph essentially told his brothers that they would eventually bow down before him. So by revealing this dream, Joseph sets the trajectory of his life as it goes forward. We see God's plan for Joseph, but we also see that it intensified his brother's hatred toward him. All right, let's read on in verses 19 through 24. So Jacob sends Joseph out with some stuff to take to his brothers. And so here comes Joseph, and the brothers see him coming, and verse 19 says, "Oh, look, here comes that dream expert. So now, come on, let's kill him and throw him into one of the pits." Well, the truth here in these verses is that animosity and jealousy can cause us to betray, can cause others to betray us. And here we see that the root of bitterness, in their hatred for Joseph, reaped the fruit of bitterness in their desire to kill him. Joseph's brothers had resentment and hatred toward him, and it was all stored up inside of them. And those hard feelings ultimately produced homicidal actions. Let's kill him. Let's throw him in the pit. Looking on down to verse 26 and 27. Judah said to his brothers, "What do we gain if we kill our brother and cover up his blood? Come on, let's sell him to the Ishmaelites and not lay a hand on him, for he is our brother, our own flesh." And his brothers agreed. The truth here is that God is at work on our behalf even when others abandon us. So though Joseph's story seemed to be coming to a screeching halt in a pit, they were going to throw him in the pit, and they were going to kill him. Reuben said, "Why don't we just leave him here?" And his plan was to come back and get him. But then Judah said, "Well, why don't we sell him?" So it seems like Joseph's life is about over, but God had other plans. The brothers called an audible and made a last-minute decision to sell him instead of leaving him there to die. Now, I think it's important to note as we look at this account that while God is at work, and no doubt God was at work in Joseph's life, and no doubt God is at work in your life and my life, it's important for us to understand that God doesn't always change the circumstances that we go through. In fact, most of the time I would say God does not change those circumstances. This is how Joseph understood what was going on years and years later. He would look at his brothers in the eye and he would say to them, "You planned evil against me, but God planned it for good. You planned to do me harm, but God used what you did to bring about good." Okay, application. Relationships are messy, and no one is immune from the damaging effects of bitterness or betrayal. So what do? Well, how can we respond? Number one, be honest with God. Many folks live in denial, refusing to admit that their heart has been broken by betrayal. So the first step is to open up with God and admit your hard feelings toward someone else who has betrayed you in prayer. And then secondly, the second step is to extend forgiveness. Make the choice to forgive someone who has betrayed you, whether they've asked for your forgiveness or not, whether they appear to be remorseful or not. And so when you offer forgiveness, it doesn't mean that you are condoning their behavior or excusing their behavior, but it can allow you to move forward without that heavy burden of bitterness in your life. And then the third application is to seek healing. If you're struggling to navigate a relationship that's been damaged by betrayal, go to a trusted Christian friend and pray with them, or go to a counselor and talk out loud about your struggle. Pray for healing. Trust God to be at work in your life. All right, let's wrap this up. Betrayal can make us bitter or better. Let's invite the Lord to use our pain to produce growth in our lives. Okay, if you click on the links, you're going to find a study guide, a summary of this week's lesson, along with a couple of handouts. And then join us on campus Sunday morning at 9 a.m. at the Ridge Church, or join us online Tuesday night at 6:30 p.m. on our Facebook page or our website as we go into greater detail. Bye now.